She spent a decade rebuilding herself from the inside out, quietly, painfully, 1 year at a time. At 41, she had finally made peace with the woman she had become. She was not looking for love. She had decided, with the calm certainty of someone who had survived too much, that she was past all of that. He had been waiting, not impatiently, not desperately, with the quiet, unshakable resolve of a man who had known something true for 10 years and simply had not yet been given permission to say it. When she walked into his building on a Tuesday afternoon in November, hired for a project she almost turned down by a client whose name meant nothing to her, she had no idea she was stepping back into a story that had already begun without her. She thought the hardest part of her life was behind her. She was wrong. The hardest part was this: learning to believe she deserved something good. He had a notebook she had never read, 10 years of words she had never heard, and a patience that was, finally, running out. If this story already has you feeling something, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me, do you believe love has an expiration date, or does it find you exactly when it's supposed to? Drop a if you're writing this one with me. Destiny Vaughn did not make decisions out of sentiment. That was the version of herself she had burned down years ago, slowly and deliberately. The way you clear a field before you plant something new. The woman who made decisions out of longing, out of hope, out of the terrifying belief that someone might actually mean what they said. That woman had cost her too much. She did not mourn her. She had simply moved on. The offer came on a Thursday in late October, forwarded through her agent with the kind of language that suggested the client was either very serious or very new to hiring composers. The brief was clean: original instrumental score, 8 to 12 pieces, for an internal campaign tied to the relaunch of a Chicago-based entertainment label. The client had heard her work on a short film the previous spring. They wanted her sound specifically. The budget was more than fair. The timeline, 8 weeks, was tight but not impossible. She sat with the email for 2 days. It wasn't the project that gave her pause. It was Chicago. She had been living in Atlanta for the past 4 years, deliberately, quietly, and the idea of being back in Illinois for 2 months stirred something in her chest she could not quite name. Not dread, exactly. More like the particular unease of returning to a place that held an older version of yourself. Her agent called on Saturday morning. The client had followed up. They were flexible on start date. They were not flexible on her being the composer. Destiny told him she would think about it. She thought about it for approximately 45 minutes, then sent the confirmation. The practical truth was that she needed the project. Not financially. She was careful with money in the way that only people who had once been genuinely careless understand. What she needed was the work itself. The discipline of it. The way a commission forced her to sit at the piano every morning and remember that she still had something to say, even when the quieter, less charitable parts of her mind suggested otherwise. She had been in that quieter place for most of the past year. The relationship had ended 18 months ago, and she had handled it the way she handled everything that hurt, methodically, without drama, with the kind of composure that impressed everyone who witnessed it and fooled no one who knew her well. Marcus had been in her life for 6 years. 6 years of learning to accommodate someone else's moods, someone else's ambitions, someone else's particular talent for making her feel that she was almost enough, but not quite. That the problem, always, was some indefinable quality she lacked. That she was capable of being loved, but only up to a certain limit, and she had a habit of reaching it. She had known it was over long before it was over. She had stayed anyway, out of something she had finally, reluctantly, diagnosed as fear. Not fear of being alone. She was good at alone. Fear of being 40 and starting over. Fear of the particular humiliation of admitting that she had given 6 years to something that was, in the end, not worth them. She flew to Chicago on a Sunday evening in early November, with 2 suitcases, a keyboard, and the practiced emotional neutrality of someone who had been managing herself for a very long time. The rental apartment was clean and unremarkable. She liked it immediately. The production offices of Moon Entertainment occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building in the West Loop, which Destiny noticed but did not particularly remark on. She had worked in enough spaces controlled by people with money to know that the architecture was usually less interesting than what happened inside it. She arrived at 9:15 on a Monday morning, 15 minutes before her scheduled introduction meeting. The assistant at the front desk, a young woman with the particular competence of someone who had learned to manage chaos without appearing to, walked her to a conference room on the 31st floor and offered her coffee with a warmth that felt genuine rather than practiced. Destiny took the coffee. She set up her materials at the far end of the table. She reviewed her preliminary notes. She did what she always did when she arrived somewhere unfamiliar. She made herself at home inside her own professionalism, which was a kind of armor she had polished over many years and had come to trust completely. She was not thinking about who the client was. She had a name, Moon Entertainment, Ki-jun Moon, CEO, and she had done the basic research any professional would do. The company was 4 years old, already significant in the independent label space, with a roster that leaned toward emerging K-pop crossover artists and a reputation for backing talent that the major labels had overlooked. The CEO was 25, young for the position, though not surprisingly so, given that the company bore his family name. She had noted all of this and filed it without much thought. She was reading through the brand brief when the door opened. She looked up. And the world did something strange and quiet and completely disorienting. It did not stop. It did not spin. It simply shifted. Like the moment when your eyes adjust in a dark room and shapes you thought were shadows resolve into something recognizable. He was 25 years old, and he was standing in the doorway of his own conference room with the easy authority of someone who had grown into a space that had always been his. And Destiny's brain did 2 things simultaneously. It registered the man in front of her with full clarity, and it reached back, involuntarily, 10 years, and found a 15-year-old boy sitting at her upright piano in a rented practice room on the north side of Chicago, playing the same 4 bars of a Debussy prelude over and over because he refused to move on until he understood why they felt the way they did. Ki-jun Moon. She had taught him for 11 months, piano and music theory, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, from the fall of 2014 through the summer of 2015. He had been a serious student, not prodigious in the flashy, aggressive way that some gifted teenagers were, but deeply attentive, the kind of student who asked questions that took her a moment to think through. He had been quiet in the way of someone who was choosing what to say, rather than uncertain about whether to speak. He had been 15 years old, and she had been 31, and she had taught him the grammar of music for 11 months. And then his family had relocated to Seoul, and the lessons had simply ended. The way all such things end. Not badly, just finally. She had not thought about him in years. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. It was not surprise. It was something more composed than that. Careful, almost. The way you hold a fragile thing you have been waiting a long time to hold. Ms. Vaughn. His voice was lower than she remembered, which was obvious, and also somehow arresting. Thank you for making the trip. Destiny stood, extended her hand, felt the particular steadiness of her own professionalism click into place like a lock turning. Mr. Moon, it's a pleasure. He shook her hand, held her gaze 1 beat longer than necessary. I think, he said, with the faintest suggestion of something, not a smile, exactly, but the space where a smile might live. You might remember me. I do, she said. You were one of my students, a long time ago. 10 years, he said. 10 years, she agreed, and sat back down, because sitting down was something to do with her body while she organized the fact of this inside herself. He took the chair across from her, not the head of the table, across from her, and opened a portfolio she hadn't noticed he was carrying, and the meeting began. And Destiny Vaughn, who was very good at her job and very practiced at the management of unexpected feeling, focused entirely on the brief and was grateful for its existence. The work was good. That was the first thing she allowed herself to think clearly, in the privacy of her apartment on the third evening, with the city lights doing their quiet thing beyond the window. The brief was thoughtful. The brand had a genuine identity that gave her something real to respond to musically. The project was worth being in Chicago for. The second thing she allowed herself to think was more complicated. She had been hired by someone who knew exactly who she was. She did not know what that meant. She did not know if it meant anything. People hired former teachers all the time for professional work. There was nothing unusual about it in principle. Ki Jun Moon ran an entertainment company. She composed music. The overlap was logical. She fell asleep before she finished convincing herself of this. The sessions in the studio were structured around her autonomy, which she appreciated. She had a dedicated space, access to the best equipment she had worked with in years, and an assistant assigned specifically to her, whose only job was to make sure she had what she needed. She worked mornings intensively and used the afternoons for review and revision. The label's in-house team would check in twice a week, but the creative direction was hers. Ki-jun came by on the fourth day, not to supervise. She understood that immediately. His body language when he entered the studio was that of someone being careful not to crowd a space that belonged to someone else. He had brought coffee. He stood near the door rather than coming fully in, and he listened to the 30 seconds she had been working on that morning without commenting until she stopped the playback herself. The second phrase, he said, the way it resolves, it almost doesn't want to. Like it's deciding at the last moment. She looked at him. That's what I was trying to do, she said. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. Left the coffee on the console. Did not stay. She sat with that for longer than was probably reasonable. He came back the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. Always briefly. Always with an observation that was precise in a way that suggested he had been listening carefully, not casually. Never with an agenda she could identify. He never told her what he wanted the music to be. He only ever responded to what it already was. It was, she recognized with some unease, exactly the quality that had made him a good student. The unease was not about him. She was honest enough with herself to know that. The unease was about the fact that she noticed, that she thought about his observations after he left, that on the mornings she expected him to come by, she was aware of the expectation in a way that was distinct from professional anticipation. She was 41 years old. She had not felt this kind of low-grade, interior alertness in years, not since the early days with Marcus, before she had learned that alertness in his presence usually meant she was tracking the weather of his mood rather than her own. This was different. She was tracking herself, her own reactions, and that was somehow more alarming. She dealt with it the way she dealt with most things that unsettled her. She went deeper into the work. She came in earlier. She pushed the compositions into more complex territory. She told herself that the project was the point, and she was in Chicago to serve the project, and everything else was peripheral. She was, she told herself, too old for this. The phrase arrived fully formed one morning as she was walking to the studio from the parking structure, hands in her coat pockets, breath visible in the November air. She was too old for whatever this was. She was 41 years old, and she had spent 6 years in a relationship that had quietly dismantled her, and she was only now, only recently, beginning to feel like someone whose opinions about her own life were worth trusting again. She was not in a position to notice a 25-year-old man and feel something complicated about it. She was not in a position to feel anything complicated at all, frankly. She was in Chicago for 8 weeks to complete a commission, and then she was going home. She said all of this very clearly to herself. It did not help as much as she wanted it to. He asked her to lunch on a Wednesday in the 3rd week. Casually. The way you ask someone to lunch when you have decided the conversation you want to have is worth slightly more than a studio corridor. They walked to a place 2 blocks from the building, a small Korean restaurant that was not trying to be anything other than what it was. He ordered without looking at the menu. She ordered carefully, aware that she was being careful. The conversation was easy. That was the worst part. It was the kind of easy that takes years to build with most people, and seemed to already exist between them, running underneath the professional context like a current. And she did not know if it was because they had known each other before, in a different form, in a different decade, or because of something that was just present now. He asked about her work, not the project, her work, the wider body of it, how she had gotten from teaching piano on the north side of Chicago to composing film scores in Atlanta. She told him, in the measured way she told most people, conservatory, a period of teaching to pay the bills, the short film that had led to the next thing, and the next thing after that. She left out the years that Marcus had occupied because she left those out with everyone. He listened with his full attention, not the performed attentiveness of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but actual, quiet, directed listening. She had noticed it when he was 15. It had been, she remembered now, slightly unusual in an adolescent. "You were the best teacher I ever had," he said, between the soup and the main course, without particular drama. "You were the best student I had that year," she said, which was true. "I thought about those lessons for a long time after we moved." His gaze dropped to his bowl, voice quiet. "The way you explained why something works, not just that it does. Why, I didn't hear that again for years." She did not know what to do with that, so she asked about the company, how he had built it, what the vision was. He answered without evasion, and she was grateful for the redirect, and lunch ended. And they walked back to the building side by side in the November cold. And she spent the afternoon composing a piece that was denser and more layered than anything she had written in months. It was the archive room that did it. She had been looking for reference recordings. Older tracks from the label's back catalog that the assistant had mentioned were stored in physical format, somewhere on the 31st floor. The archive room was at the end of a corridor she had not been down before, a medium-sized space lined with shelving, organized with the methodical care of someone who understood that history had value. She found the recordings quickly enough. She was about to leave when she knocked a box off the lower shelf with her elbow. The box was not well sealed. It tilted when it hit the floor, and several items spilled out. Loose papers, a few printed photographs, a stack of what looked like program booklets from small recitals, and a notebook, dark green cover, worn at the edges, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. She picked everything up. She almost set the notebook aside without opening it. Almost. The handwriting on the first page stopped her cold. It was teenage handwriting, not sloppy, but unmistakably adolescent in its pressure and proportion. The letters slightly too deliberate in the way of someone who had recently decided that handwriting was worth taking seriously. She recognized it the way you recognize a voice you have not heard in years, but knew very well once, with a jolt that bypassed analysis entirely. The first page was a lyric fragment. 4 lines, crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. The words that survived the revisions were about a room, about sound, about the particular quality of afternoon light in a space where someone was teaching you how to hear. She turned the page, and the next. The notebook was not a diary. It was a songwriter's workbook. Pages of lyrics in various stages of completion, chords notated in the margins, arrows connecting phrases, question marks where a word had not yet arrived. She understood immediately what she was looking at. She had kept similar notebooks herself, at 15, at 20, at 35. This was the private record of someone learning to translate what they felt into something they could hand to another person. She would have set it down. She was already preparing to set it down. And then her eye caught a word on the third page that anchored her. Her name, not Ms. Vaughn, not the teacher. Destiny. Written inside a lyric line she had to read twice to be sure she understood correctly, because the first time her brain offered her an interpretation, and then immediately suggested she had misread it. She had not misread it. She sat down on the floor of the archive room with the notebook in her lap and read it from the beginning. It took her 20 minutes. Some pages were dense with revision, Some had only a single finished phrase. A few were just chord progressions with a word or two above them, not enough to call a lyric, but enough to call a direction. The notebook spanned, by the dates in the margins, a period of about 8 months. The fall of 2014 through the spring of 2015. The year she had taught him. She was not naive, and she was not given to dramatic interpretation. She read carefully, with the attention she would give to any text she was trying to understand accurately, and the understanding that assembled itself, slowly, and then all at once, was this. A 15-year-old boy had spent 11 months writing about her, not in the overwrought, transactional way of adolescent infatuation. There was none of that in these pages. The feeling in the notebook was quieter than that, more patient. It was the feeling of someone watching something they could not yet name, trying to find the language for it before the opportunity to use it disappeared. He had never said a word. She sat on the floor for a long time after she finished reading. The feeling that moved through her was not flattery. It was older than that and less comfortable. It was something closer to grief. For the boy who had carried this alone. For the woman who had not known. For the years between then and now that could not be reopened. And underneath the grief, something she did not immediately want to look at. A kind of recognition. She knew this feeling. Not his feeling, but the shape of it. The experience of noticing someone at a distance, from within a context that made the noticing impossible to act on. She knew what it cost to hold something like that and say nothing. She put the notebook in her bag. She told herself she would return it without mentioning she had read it. She told herself this the whole way home. She did not sleep well. Not because of the notebook specifically. Or not only because of the notebook. Because of what the notebook had dislodged. She lay in the dark of the rental apartment and let herself be honest. Which was something she had been avoiding with more energy than she had realized. She was not indifferent to Ki-Jun Moon. She had told herself she had constructed a very reasonable argument for why she was. She was 41, he was 25, she was his former teacher, he was her current client. She had no business feeling anything for him that was not professional. She was too old for this. She was done being reckless with herself. She did not have the reserves for it. She had only just started feeling like herself again. All of this was true, and none of it changed the fact that when he came into the studio on Tuesday mornings, she was aware of it in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy. She was 41 years old, and she had spent 6 years with a man who had made her feel, consistently, and subtly, and with great skill, that she was almost enough. She had internalized that almost. She had built a whole architecture of self-management around it, and somewhere in that architecture, behind the composure and the professionalism and the carefully maintained emotional distance, was a woman who had stopped believing she was someone a person would choose, not settle for, not tolerate. Choose. She lay in the dark and thought about a 15-year-old boy who had sat at her piano and written her name in the margins of his lyric notebook for 8 months, and said nothing. She thought about a 25-year-old man who had tracked down her agent, reviewed her reel, made the budget work, and waited for her to walk into his building. She thought, this is either the most beautiful thing you have ever been adjacent to, or it is something you should be very careful about. She thought, what if it is both? She waited until Thursday, not to gather herself. She did not feel particularly gathered. But because the work had to be done in the meantime, and she was mata and above everything else, a professional. She finished the 5th piece on Wednesday evening. It was the best thing she had written in 2 years. She did not examine why. She went to his office on Thursday morning. She had called ahead. His assistant had confirmed he had 30 minutes before a call. She brought the notebook in her bag, because she had decided she would return it regardless of how the conversation went. And returning it was the honest thing to do. His office was a corner space with a view of the city that would have been ostentatious if he had done anything to perform it, but he hadn't. The desk was a working desk. The shelves had books on them that looked red. He looked up when she came in and stood. Not the performative courtesy of a boss receiving an employee, but the habitual regard of someone who had been taught that standing meant you were taking something seriously. She set the notebook on his desk. He looked at it, then up at her. "I found it in the archive room," she said. "I wasn't looking for it. I knocked a box over." A pause. Not a surprised pause. A careful one. "I read it," she said. "I know I shouldn't have, but I read it." He was quiet for a long moment. He did not look away. He did not look embarrassed, which was the thing she had expected and had been braced for. He looked like someone who had just watched a door open that they had been standing outside for a very long time. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" She had prepared for more than okay. "I'm not going to pretend I left it there on purpose," he said. "I didn't even know it was in this building. But I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry you read it." She sat down in the chair across from his desk, because she needed to be level when she said the rest of it. "You were 15 years old, Ki-jun. I know how old I was. I was your teacher. I was 31. That's 16 years older than you. I know the math. It's not funny." "I'm not laughing." He wasn't. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk, and his voice did not waver. "I was 15. I'm not 15 now. You were my teacher. You're not my teacher now. The things that made it impossible then don't exist anymore. I'm aware of what I felt when I was 15. I'm aware of what I feel now. Those are two different things, and I'm only asking you to consider the second one." She breathed. "You hired me," she said. "You knew exactly who I was, and you hired me." "Yes." "You should have told me. Would you have come?" The honesty of the question landed squarely. She held it for a moment. "No," she said. "That's why I didn't tell you. I wanted you to see the project first, to know the work was real." He paused. "It is real. Your music is exactly what this company needed. Nothing about that was a pretense. But the rest of it was. The rest of it was hope, which is different." She looked at him, at the man who had been a boy who had sat at her piano and learned Debussy, with the patience of someone who understood that some things take the time they take. She thought about all the ways she had told herself, over the past 3 weeks, that she was too old for this, that she was past it, that she did not have the reserves. Ki-jun. She said his name the way she had said it when she was his teacher, not unkindly, but with the weight of meaning it. "I am 16 years older than you. I have had a long, difficult relationship that I am still recovering from. I am not in a position to be someone's romantic project." "You're not a project." He said it without heat. "You're the woman I have been thinking about for 10 years. That's not a project. That's a fact." She stood up. She needed to leave before she said something she could not take back, in either direction. "I need to think," she said. He nodded, picked up the notebook from the desk, held it out to her. She looked at it. "Keep it," he said. "It was always yours." She took it. She left. She threw herself into the work with the kind of focus that is indistinguishable from avoidance if you are not watching carefully, and she was not watching carefully. She finished pieces 6 and 7 in 4 days. They were technically proficient. They were not her best work, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway. She did not go to the studio on Tuesday morning. She told herself she was working from home. She told herself the project did not require her to be on site every day. She told herself these things in the morning, and by the afternoon she was sitting at the keyboard in the apartment playing nothing in particular, watching her own hands move through chord progressions that kept resolving to the same place no matter where she started. She called her friend Renata in Atlanta. Renata was 53 years old and had been married twice, and had opinions about love that she delivered with the frankness of someone who had earned the right to be direct. Destiny told her the whole thing. Renata was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then, "So what's the problem?" "He's 25. "Yes, and I'm 41, and he was my student, and I just got out of 6 years of something that was a different person who treated you like a different person than you are." Renata said. I know. I was there. I watched you shrink for 6 years. Destiny. I watched you make yourself smaller so he could feel bigger. That is not a qualification for never being loved again. That is a reason to be loved correctly. Silence. He's 25, Renata. And you are 41 and brilliant, and you have spent the last year and a half convincing yourself you are too old for the good things. Which is, I say this with love, absolutely ridiculous. You don't know him. Tell me one thing you know about him. Destiny thought about it. Thought about Tuesday mornings and coffee left on the console and the way he listened to 30 seconds of her work and found the exact thing she had been trying to do. Thought about a 15-year-old boy who had refused to move on from 4 bars of Debussy until he understood them. Thought about a notebook full of words he had never said. He pays attention, she said finally. He really pays attention. To what I'm doing, to what I mean, to... He doesn't miss things. A pause. Then Renata said, Don't, me. I'm not doing anything. I'm just listening to you describe a man who pays attention to you, and then tell me you shouldn't want that. Destiny stared at the keyboard. I'm scared, she said. It was the first time she had said it that plainly, to anyone, including herself. I know, Renata said. But scared is not the same as wrong. Scared just means it matters. She hung up. She sat at the keyboard for a long time. She opened the notebook to the last page, the last entry, spring 2015, 2 weeks before his family left for Seoul. The lyric was unfinished. 4 lines that stopped mid-phrase, as if he had run out of time or courage or both. The last words, in his adolescent handwriting, were simply, I don't think she knows. She closed the notebook. She went to the piano. And she played. Not for the project, not for the commission, not for any audience. She played the way she had played before she was a professional, before she was careful, before she learned to manage what she felt by putting it somewhere organized and contained. She played until the apartment was dark, and she was tired, and the thing inside her chest that she had been refusing to name had finally named itself. She did not go to him immediately. She was not a woman who moved toward things impulsively, that had been trained out of her, first by circumstance and then by choice. But she let herself sit with the decision for 2 days, examining it from every angle, looking for the part of it that was wishful thinking or loneliness or nostalgia, because she owed herself that honesty. She did not find it. What she found, underneath the fear and the habit of self-protection, and the very reasonable concerns about age and history, and the professional complexity of the situation, was something simple. She did not want to leave Chicago without telling him the truth. Not because she owed him a response. She did not, technically, owe him anything, but because she had spent too long not telling the truth about what she wanted, and she had decided, in the aftermath of the last 6 years, that she was done with that. She went to the studio on Monday morning. She worked with full focus for 3 hours. She finished piece 8, which was quiet and complicated, and the best thing she had done since arriving in Chicago. She sat with it after the final playback, listening to the silence that followed, and felt the particular satisfaction of something completed honestly. Then she went to his office. His assistant looked up, smiled with the warmth that Destiny had come to recognize as genuine, and said he was on a call, but it would be ending in 10 minutes. She waited in the corridor. She stood by the window and looked at the city below, the West Loop traffic, the sky beginning to gray toward the afternoon, and she did not rehearse what she was going to say, because she had found, over the years, that the things worth saying did not need rehearsal. His office door opened. He saw her immediately. And again, that expression she had first seen 3 weeks ago in the conference room, the one she had not been able to read then but could read now. It was not quite relief. It was the look of someone who had been waiting with full knowledge that they might be waiting for nothing, and who had decided that the waiting was worth it regardless. She walked in. He closed the door. He did not sit. I read the last page again, she said. The last entry, spring 2015. He nodded. I don't think she knows, she said. That's how it ended. I ran out of time, he said. We were leaving in 2 weeks. I didn't know how to say it in a way that was fair to either of us. You were 15. I was 15, he agreed. And I already knew something I didn't have the words for yet. She looked at him for a long moment. Looked at the man he had become. The patience of him. The steadiness. The way he occupied a room without performing it. She thought about all the things she had told herself over the past 3 weeks. All the distances she had tried to maintain. All the very reasonable arguments she had made for why this was not something she should want. I am 16 years older than you, she said. Not as an argument this time. As a fact she was laying on the table, plainly, so they were both looking at the same thing. I know, he said. I am still putting myself back together from something that took a lot out of me. I know that too. And you are 25 years old, Kijun. You have not. She stopped. Thought about how to say this without it being condescending and found the honest version of it. You haven't had time to know what you don't know yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully. You're right that I haven't lived everything yet. I won't argue with that. But I know what I feel when you are in the room. I know what I felt at 15, and I know what I feel now, and they're not the same feeling, but they come from the same place. He paused. I'm not asking you to be certain. I'm asking you to not decide it's impossible before we find out. The city moved below them, indifferent and constant. Destiny had spent 18 months learning to trust herself again. Learning to listen to the part of her that knew things before she could articulate them. That part had been saying something since the day she had walked into his conference room and the world had shifted, and she had been arguing with it ever since. She stopped arguing. I'm going to finish the project, she said. I know. All 12 pieces, full delivery. That doesn't change. I wouldn't want it to. And then, she stopped. Let herself actually feel what was happening instead of analyzing it. Let it be real rather than managed. And then I'd like to stay in Chicago a little longer, if that's something you want to figure out together. He looked at her. The careful expression shifted, not dramatically, not into anything excessive, just into the look of someone who has been holding a breath for a long time and has finally, at last, let it go. I've been wanting to figure that out, he said, for about 10 years. She felt something loosen in her chest, something she had been holding so tightly and for so long that she had forgotten it was not supposed to be a permanent weight. Then we have a lot of time to make up for, she said. No, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, quiet and sure and completely without drama, that she felt down to her feet. I don't think of it as time to make up for. I think of it as time to begin. The commission was delivered on the 30th of November. All 12 pieces, fully realized, mixed and mastered in the studio on the 31st floor of a glass building in the West Loop. The label's creative director called it the most cohesive score they had received for any campaign in their 4 years of operation. The CEO reviewed the final delivery and said only that it was exactly what he had believed she would make. Destiny Vaughn did not fly back to Atlanta on December 1st. She extended the rental on the apartment for another month. She told her agent she was working on something new, which was true. She was. She had started a piece that had nothing to do with the commission, that had been assembling itself in her head since the afternoon in the archive room, built from the chord progressions of a 15-year-old's lyric notebook and whatever it was she was feeling now, which was big and complicated and not entirely comfortable, and also, underneath all of that, something she had nearly forgotten the texture of. It felt like wanting, actual, straightforward wanting, not the cautious, provisional wanting of someone bracing for disappointment, but the kind that assumes it has a right to exist. She had not felt that in a very long time, They had dinner on the first Friday of December, at a place she chose, and she was nervous in the way she had not been nervous on a date since her late 20s. Not the anxious nervousness of someone managing an impression, but the alive nervousness of someone who was actually present, actually in the room, actually with this person, actually willing to find out what happened. He was, she discovered over dinner, funnier than she had expected. Not performatively funny. There was no audience in him, but quietly, precisely funny, in the way that people are when they have been paying close attention to the world and are willing to share what they noticed. He made her laugh twice in the first hour. The second time, she caught herself mid-laugh and thought, "There you are." She was not sure if she was talking to herself or to the feeling. It didn't matter. He told her about Seoul, about the years after Chicago, learning his father's industry from the inside while finishing school, the particular pressure of being the son of someone who had built something real and expecting you to prove you could build something too. She heard, under the professional narrative, the texture of a young man who had learned early that the things that mattered to him personally were things he would need to protect deliberately, because the world he was being prepared to inhabit did not always leave room for them. "The company," he said, at one point, over tea. "The name on it, people assume that means it was handed to me. Was it?" "The capital, partially. The vision, no." A pause, then, "I knew what I wanted to build before I knew if I could. That's the only honest answer." She understood that. It was in a different language. The same thing she had been doing for 20 years. They walked after dinner, through the December cold along the river, and the city did its magnificent and different thing all around them, and she did not think about age or history, or the ways this could be complicated. She thought about the fact that she was walking beside someone who made her feel, for the first time in longer than she cared to calculate, like the most interesting version of herself. Not the managed version, the actual one. He stopped at the bridge, looked at the water, then at her. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not carefully." She turned toward him. The cold off the river was sharp, and the lights of the city were doing something beautiful behind him. And she was 41 years old, and she was, she realized, happy. Quietly, surprisingly, without any of the effort she had been trained to expect happiness to require. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She considered lying. Old habit. Then, "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "So am I. I think that means we're both taking it seriously." She looked at him. This man who had been a boy who had known something he could not yet say, who had waited without asking her to wait, who had wanted her back in a room with him badly enough to build something worth bringing her to. And she thought, the thing about patience is that it is only worth anything if the waiting ends. She reached over and took his hand. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was very small, in the scheme of things. Two people standing on a bridge in December, the city around them, the cold air between them warming by degrees. But it was, she knew, the moment, the one she would remember, the one that had been approaching for 10 years from a direction she could not have predicted. He looked down at their hands, then up at her, and the expression on his face, careful, warm, the particular relief of something true finally being said out loud, was the same one she had seen in the conference room 3 weeks ago, when she had first walked in, and the world had shifted. She understood it now. He had recognized her. And she, slowly, honestly, with all the earned caution of a woman who had learned to trust herself again, was beginning to recognize him back. She had said, "I am too old for love." He had waited 10 years to prove otherwise. They were both, it turned out, exactly on time.